All right, this morning we're going to be in Luke chapter 24, and this is a passage. This is the last chapter of the book of Luke, and so this is really the end of the Gospel of Luke, and we're going to pick it up about halfway through. And so, just to give you some context, we are squarely right in the middle of Resurrection Sunday during this particular passage. And what's happened so far is some of the women, the disciples, the followers of Jesus, they had gone to Jesus' tomb that morning and looking to basically dress the corpse and spices and such and all of that. And instead they find an empty tomb with the stone rolled away. And instead of finding Jesus there, they find the remnants of his garments, and then they have an encounter with these angelic beings who basically said, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? Why are you looking for the living one among the dead?" And so that those women then, they didn't actually encounter Jesus or the resurrected Jesus in that moment directly, but they had this exchange with these messengers. And they did report some of that back to the rest of the disciples, and the disciples don't really know what to do with that. Peter goes to investigate. He checks out the tomb, and same kind of thing happens, only he doesn't even encounter the angels. So he just kind of finds an empty tomb that's suspect and interesting, and kind of, it certainly is making his wheels turn, but he still isn't actually in a place where he has encountered Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, and he's not even in a place where he's embraced that possibility, that belief that, of course the tomb is empty because he's risen. Peter hasn't been able to land there, and really none of the other disciples yet have been able to land there. And so that's where we're going to pick it up in the book of Luke in chapter 24, and we'll start off in verse 13. "And behold, the two of the disciples, that is, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place." What things? All of it. The last couple years, but really the last couple days in particular. These are two disciples, and it doesn't really give us a lot of detail of who they are. We get one of their names. We don't even know if they're both male or not. One of them's a male. It's fairly likely the other one's a female, just by omission, the way ancient texts were written. But essentially, all we really know is these are two disciples that do not yet comprehend or believe that Jesus is resurrected. They're basically kind of retreating at this point. They're leaving ground zero of what just happened in Jerusalem, and they're kind of going back home with their tails between their legs. And they're having a conversation about what just happened. And they're kind of actually even having some discussion and light debate about the details and what might be transpiring. They also had heard the report from the women who had seen the empty tomb earlier that morning. So verse 15, "While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him." So I'll tell you right up front, I believe the main goal, or if not one of the main goals of today's message and today's meeting is really for you and for me to be able to insert ourselves into this kind of, I'll say this narrative. And not that historically you're going to say, well, someday I'll be walking to Emmaus from Jerusalem, and this is what will happen. But no, I mean, in a more abstract sense, we're all on a journey. We're all journeying in life. We're all going from place to place. And hopefully along the way, we're looking for and encountering Jesus as we go. And what's interesting is this is really one of the first, if not the first, encounter that a disciple has with the resurrected Jesus. So we have 4 Gospels that are chock full of information and narratives and teachings and exchanges and engagements and interactions that Jesus had with disciples and adversaries and passerbys and every walk of life and every type of person. What we don't have a ton of, at least not in the Gospels, is moments like this where a resurrected Jesus is now encountering and journeying with people that want to follow him. And this actually makes this particular passage, that kind of setup and context actually makes this particular passage, I'll say, pertinent and relevant in a way that maybe many other passages aren't, because really you could insert yourself into this scenario and it wouldn't be that far from the context that these people were in. You're not going to encounter Jesus before he crucified, the flesh and blood Jesus of Nazareth that walked around for 3.5 years doing miracles and signs. You're not going to encounter that particular manifestation or version of Jesus. You're going to encounter the resurrected Christ. You're going to encounter this version of Jesus, this stage of where he's at, because this is where he is at. He is risen today just as much as he was risen 2,000 years ago on Resurrection Sunday. Okay. Now, verse 16 is an interesting one. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him, recognizing this resurrected Jesus. Their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. Now, first key point that I'm hoping you get from today. There are moments in your journey where Jesus is literally right alongside of you. And in fact, I would argue every moment is one of those moments. Every moment, Jesus is he's inside of you, he's within you, you're in him. There's a no distance relationship between you and him. And so every moment is actually a moment where you're on this journey and Jesus is right there with you and in you, through you, the whole thing. Your life, you died, and your life is now hidden with Christ in God. That's Pauline theology later. These disciples don't know that. These disciples haven't read the Apostle Paul's teachings, his New Testament writings, the way you and I probably have. But nonetheless, this was true for them, and it is also true for you. So they're on a journey, and they're encountering Jesus, and Jesus is with them on this journey, and yet they, for at least part of the journey, are unaware. They're unable to recognize that Jesus is right there. This sometimes happens to me, and I kind of think it probably sometimes happens to you too. So let's keep reading. Verse 17, and he said to them, "What are these words that you were exchanging with one another as you were walking?" Now I'll tell you right up front, Jesus is he's going to play these disciples like a fiddle. Like this is all for their benefit. This is all for this is really for these disciples. But Jesus is going to play them like a fiddle in order for them to get the maximum benefit, the maximum encounter, the maximum connection with him as they go forward from this exchange. So you're going to watch Jesus play dumb a little bit. You're going to watch Jesus ask some questions that he's not asking because he doesn't know the answer. He's asking because he wants them to ask the question for themselves. What are these words that you were exchanging with one another as you were walking? And they stood still looking sad. Oh, man. Sometimes it could feel sad when you're on that journey and you don't know Jesus is right there, but he is. There's moments like that where sometimes it could feel a little sad, and this is definitely an extreme version of that. Like they experienced this trauma of, we followed this rabbi, this teacher, our master, our leader. We followed this man, maybe, and we don't know how long these disciples were running with Jesus, but we know they were close enough where they were deeply affected by what just transpired with his death, his crucifixion, and they're confounded and confused. And so right now this is a traumatic moment for them. But again, please include your journey in this experience, because there's relevancy, there's pertinence in all of it, I believe. And they stood there looking sad. Verse 18, one of them named Cleopas answered and said to him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things that have happened here in these days? What rock are you living under, Jesus?" Who we don't know is actually Jesus yet at this point. This is one of those moments where something big has happened. And I don't know, maybe this has happened to you, where you're talking to somebody and they don't know about it. It's like they don't own a smartphone, or they don't They've never seen a newspaper or news or whatever. And you're like, how do you not know about this? Is one of those moments for them. Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things that have happened here in these days? And he said to them, what things? What things? And they said to him, now listen, the answer to their question, or the answer to his question, their answer to his question is going to reveal where they are in their journey of knowing Jesus. It's going to reveal to us, and it's going to reveal ultimately to them, where they are in their level of encounter and intimacy with the Lord. And you're going to see they actually get pretty far down the road. They actually make it a lot of the way, but they don't stick the landing quite yet. What things? And they said to him, the things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word, and in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened. Okay, so let's do like a quick running tally here. What did they get right, and what did they maybe not get a complete picture of where they are in their journey with Jesus? The things they got right. Hey, this guy's a prophet. He's mighty in word, in deed. There's power there. He was mighty in the eyes of God. He was mighty in the eyes of people. He did all this great stuff. Things started to go south when you hear this. We were hoping that it was going to be him. He was going to be the one to redeem Israel. So let's talk about this for a second. I'm not an ancient Jew. You're not an ancient Jew. So this means something to them in their context, their cultural and historical context, that it really doesn't translate directly to us without a little bit of legwork. But let's do it this way. We like to call Jesus, Jesus. That's our English kind of transliteration of his name. But really his name, if you were to walk around with him 2,000 years ago, it would be something, and I'm going to mess this up, I'll tell you that in advance, something like Yeshua. All right? Yeshua. And Yeshua was really just the Hebrew name, the same name that we have for Joshua. So when you think of like the Old Testament judges and you think about the Old Testament chronology of what happened with Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt, out of slavery, and then ultimately the original intention was for God to use Moses to lead the Israelites into the Promised Land. But as you might remember, Moses doesn't actually end up going to the Promised Land. He starts this mission, he starts this path, this place with God, this journey with God, and before it culminates fully, his life ends. And there's a story there, we won't get into it. That will be for another day. But ultimately, the torch gets passed to an individual, one of Moses' close inner circle followers, named Joshua. Same name that they would call Jesus, Yeshua. Same name. So you got to realize, when they're walking around with Jesus 3.5 years, when they looked at Jesus in the eye and said, hey, Yeshua, there was a mental connection on some level to this other character that they were so familiar with from their Hebrew scriptures. And think about this for a moment. Joshua was ultimately the person that led Israel, led the people of God into their promised land. He was the one that initially got them into the promised land and started taking over. He started driving out the enemies, the opposition, the forces that were opposed to what God was doing. He started driving them out. And for them in Israel, it was all a very natural geopolitical manifestation where it was literally like nation versus nation. Like, we're going to go to battle and physically fight off these Philistines and Canaanites and whoeverites and Amalekites and some other ites. And they're fighting these people off, and little by little, they're taking more and more ground in this promised land that God had promised to their forefather Abraham generations prior. And so now you have this new guy showing up a long time later with the same exact name, and people are starting to call him the Messiah, the person that's going to deliver Israel. And so when they think of Jesus, Joshua, as the Messiah, they're picturing this Messiah, and this Messiah is going to deal with this problem that they're currently in as a nation, and that problem is that same promised land that their ancestors had fought so hard to take. That same promised land that they had ebbed and flowed in and out of over the course of the Old Testament writings, that same promised land is now currently occupied by Rome. They are now basically taken over, and they're subjects to this Roman Empire, and they have a Caesar, a king that calls himself the Son of God. And so for the Jew, hanging out with a guy who might be the Messiah, and his name is Joshua, they're picturing something. Okay. We were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. So that was kind of a lot of legwork to give you some Jewish background. What I'm hoping to do now is jump with you into how this might connect with you in your life. Part of what blocked Cleopas and this other disciple, the two disciples that are on the road to Emmaus, part of what prevented their eyes from being opened and being able to see the resurrected Jesus for who he was right away, part of it was this incorrect expectation, this incorrect thought process surrounding what Jesus came to do and who Jesus is. And so sometimes when we try to make Jesus into something that he's not, we'll miss Jesus for who he actually is. And that can sound a little scary for a second, because some of you are like, oh no. Well, I have some really high expectations of Jesus, and if what this teacher, if this preacher, pastor person is right, maybe I'm putting my stock in the wrong thing, and is my faith aiming in the wrong direction? I'm not trying to tell you your faith is wrong. I'm not trying to tell you your expectations are too high. I'm saying your expectations might be aimed slightly askew. There's never a version of this where you expect too much of Jesus. So don't hear me wrong. The problem wasn't they expected too much. The problem was actually they expected too little. So Jesus doesn't disappoint. The real resurrected Jesus doesn't come in and say, wow, I was oversold, and now I'm going to have to bring you down to earth. That doesn't happen. But there are times where we're aiming at a version of Jesus that isn't the resurrected Jesus. Jesus was actually much more concerned with the salvation of all of mankind, so that they would all know the Father, heart, and love of God, and have no impediment or blockage to engage that Father, heart, and love of God. Jesus' goal was to connect us to that. And he said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one reaches the Father, no one comes to the Father except through me. And so, yeah, they're looking for somebody to overthrow the bad guys, the government that they don't like. Fine, so be it. I'm not saying that wasn't a worthwhile goal. Jesus came to do something bigger and better than that. Jesus came to do something bigger and better than that, and them aiming too low and slightly in an askew direction caused them to not be able to see Jesus in his resurrected form. So I guess the takeaway that I'm trying to build towards here is sometimes we're actually aiming a little bit too low. And sometimes we're aiming a little bit too low and to the left or to the right to what Jesus is actually saying. And you might be wondering, okay, well, how do I know? How do I calibrate this? How do I make sure I'm hitting the bullseye of who Jesus really is? We'll get there. I think the rest of the story helps us with that. So let's read verse 21 one more time. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened. Why would they denote that? For us, you and I, it's an easy answer. It's like, well, the third day is the day he resurrected, right? Well, they clearly don't believe that that's what's happening. So it's something more subtle than that for them. Why are they noting the third day? And the reality is Jesus actually plainly tells them several times, even in the book of Luke, by the way, we're going to Jerusalem. I'm going to get handed over to the chief priests, the leaders of the religious sects and all that, and I'm going to be killed, and I'll rise again on the third day. Can we pop up Luke chapter 9, verse 44, or whatever one I loaded in there? Jesus, sometimes I have moments like this with Maven or Grayson. I don't know if you've ever had these exchanges where you're trying to explain something that you think is relatively matter of fact, but the person, it's not that they're incapable of understanding you, it's that they're just not really hearing you. They're just not really listening. They're distracted with their own thing. Man, Maven is good at this. And all toddlers are. I'm not singling out Maven. This is a moment where Jesus is already, just earlier in the chapter, Jesus literally says almost the same thing, only he says, on the third day, this is what's going to happen. But he's trying to explain this to them, and by this point, there's actually a little bit of exasperation in his tone, it feels like, the way it's worded at least. Let these words sink into your ears. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. This is going to happen. Luke 18, there's another moment like this. Then he took the 12 aside and said to them, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and all things which are written through the prophets about the Son of Man will be accomplished. Next verse. For he will be handed over to the Gentiles and will be mocked and mistreated and spit upon. And after they have scourged him, they will kill him. And the third day he will rise again. Now you might be thinking, like, wait a minute. How dumb are they? This isn't like a parable. This isn't like, well, the parable of the sower or the parable of wheat, and they get to like figure it out and interpret it, and they just didn't understand the symbology. He just told them what's going to happen exactly, and said specifically, on the third day, I'm going to rise again. So why are they all knotted up now? Why are they all messed up with this? One more verse. But the disciples, so this is right after what we just read. This is right after Jesus just explained that whole thing. The disciples understood none of these things, and the meaning of the statement was hidden from them, and they did not comprehend the things that were said. Again, your question might be, well, why? What are they doing wrong that's blocking them? And the answer is, again, they're aiming too low and to the left. They're somehow, they're not actually hearing him for what he's saying. They're picturing, yeah, but you're going to redeem Israel, right? You're going to go beat up big bad Caesar, and you're going to get rid of these Roman soldiers. That's what you mean by this, right, Jesus? And it actually says, I don't know if it's this passage or another one in Luke, there's one passage where it actually says, like, yeah, they didn't understand it, and they were afraid to ask questions about it. Why were they afraid to ask questions? Because why is anyone afraid to ask a question? You're afraid of the answer. What if the answer is different than what you need it to be or want it to be or you think you need it to be? What if the answer is something different than what you were expecting and hoping for? And in this case, it is. And again, Jesus doesn't disappoint. Jesus isn't oversold. That Jesus outdoes every expectation. Jesus is better than any other thing. You know, there's scriptures that talk about Jesus and the love of Christ. It's beyond what you can ask or imagine. It's beyond what you could ask or think. And so you're not going to outdo what Jesus is or who Jesus is, but you might aim too low or you might aim askew and then miss out what he's actually trying to say and do. That's why they couldn't see. So back to Luke 24. And I don't remember where we were. We were in the third day verse. 22. Thank you. Quick other note here on the third day that's important. Again, they didn't know this, but this is going to be part of what hopefully culminates by the end of our meeting here. Third day. Go to Genesis chapter 1. You don't have to go there. Just the projector will go there. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. And it was so. Next verse. And the land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kind. And God saw that it was good. Man, did you almost feel like we read the same verse twice in a row there? It's almost like God really wants us to hear this. So he said it almost twice in a row. Next verse. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. Now, jump over to John 12. And Jesus answered them, saying, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. What did Jesus just do? Well, I didn't give you the whole context, so maybe you didn't connect, but I'll give you more context. This is a moment where actually a bunch of Gentiles come and they hear about Jesus, and they're like, we want to meet this guy. And so they go to Philip and a couple of the other disciples, and they're like, we want to meet Jesus. And Philip's like, I don't. Sometimes the disciples during the Gospels were a little bit like, I don't know, like mobsters. And they're like, don't let the children play with Jesus. They're not allowed to do, like, they're almost like bodyguards or like the Secret Service for Jesus. I don't know what pick whatever weird euphemism you want to use. They were very protective of Jesus. Not because they thought Jesus was going to get beat up by children or by Gentiles, but because he's our Jesus. He's our rabbi. He belongs to us. He's what makes us special, so we don't want a bunch of kids playing with him, and we don't want a bunch of Gentiles talking to him. He's our rabbi. We're gonna redeem Israel. We're gonna get rid of Caesar, and we're gonna be famous with Jesus because we were with him the whole time. And so they're very protective of Jesus. This is one of those moments, and so some Gentiles want to meet Jesus, and Jesus doesn't actually answer the question when they present the disciples, say, well, hey, these Gentiles want to. Instead, he just starts talking about this. And you're like, what? What is he saying, though? He's saying, look, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Deeper theology, but what he's really saying is, look, they want to meet me, cool. And this doesn't actually say whether or not he allows that to happen physically right then and there. That's not the point. What he's saying with his answer is, that's why I came. I came so that I would be a kernel of wheat that falls into the ground and dies. And when I die in the ground, when a seed falls in the ground and dies, it cracks open and the life that's in it sprouts. And all of a sudden, it starts to become this organism that produces much fruit after its kind. Genesis 1, what we read, it's the seed principle. And Jesus is saying, look, all of that natural seed principle described in Genesis 1, I'm going to go do that spiritually. And I'm going to make it so that when I go into the ground and die, I'm going to be able to reproduce my kind, my likeness in everyone, including the Jew and the Gentile. So you could tell your Gentile friends that want to meet me, I'm coming for them. But it might not be the way they were thinking. And that's kind of been the theme of this morning. And so, yeah, the third day was significant, but for the disciples in Luke 24, it was only significant insofar as they kind of sort of remembered Jesus talking about the third day, but they didn't understand it. They were like, we were hoping he was going to be the one to redeem Israel. And now it's the third day. And they just didn't get it. They didn't even remember exactly what he said. They just kind of knew something was supposed to happen today, and it hasn't happened. So what's going on? All right, next verse in Luke 24. But also some women among us amazed us when they were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the women also had said, but him they did not see. And he said to them, O foolish men and slow of heart to believe. And you might be like, wow, resurrected Jesus is kind of mean. Well, not really. First of all, this is translated, so who knows how this sounded in their immediate native tongue. It may have not played quite as, abruptly as we read it in this English translation. But even if it does, this isn't about Jesus being mean. This is Jesus about saying, hey, remember when I was saying, let this sink into your ears? Remember when I was like, Maven, listening ears? And like, remember when I tried to say this to you like 5 times, 10 times? Like, as we were coming to Jerusalem, I told you this was going to happen. And you were so busy getting ready to bear arms. And how many swords do we need to overthrow the Romans? What do we need to do here? We were so busy to fight off Caesar that you didn't hear anything I said. Oh, foolish men and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets had spoken. Keep going. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and to enter into his glory? They still don't know that they're talking to Jesus. Keep going. Then, beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself in the scriptures. Which scriptures? Well, he just told you, the Old Testament scriptures. Basically, he's saying, look, I'm going to crack this Bible open with you, and rather than you like getting fixated on Joshua and how he got you into the promised land, or getting fixated on, or fine, get fixated on Joshua, but in there, you need to see me. In that story, where's Jesus? In the story of Abraham, where is Jesus? In the story of the Exodus, where is Jesus? In the story of the Passover, where is Jesus? And he starts to show them throughout the scriptures, the law, the prophets, all of them, here's where I was, and oh, here's some mountain peaks also that even showed you where I needed to suffer to go and accomplish this. So here's one of the key takeaways for today for you. When you read the Bible, your goal ought to be this, especially when you read the Old Testament, but honestly, even when you read the New Testament. Let me tell you something from my own life. I came to Christ when I was 19 years old, super gung-ho. I'm a type A type personality. I'm a go-getter. You tell me that Jesus is Lord and this thing's real and God loves me, and I'm off to the races with that. I hit the ground running. I was sprinting as hard and as fast as I could. I read the Bible every day. I was trying to understand it. I was asking questions. I was reading articles. I was doing every Christian gymnastic I knew how to do, and I was reading the New Testament, the Old Testament, and man, it got hard after a little while. Because I was like, the more I read, you think you're okay in the New Testament. You're like, well, God loves you, and Jesus died for you, and the sins are paid for. But then you get into like what Jesus said sometimes. You're like, you need me, you want me to act that way? You expect me to live a lifestyle with that level of conduct towards other people? There's no way I'm going to live the Sermon on the Mount out. Like, I remember reading the Sermon on the Mount and being like, there's no way. There's no way. Not possible. And I was reading the Bible. You ever get a piece of mail and you open it and you're like, this is a bill. This is a bill. It's got that print, that type, and it's got your name and address and the company or the tax organization, whatever it is, and you're reading, you're like, this is a big bill. This is like thousands of dollars bill. And you're looking, and you're like, where in the world did this bill come from? I wasn't expecting this bill. I've paid all of my bills, and now there's this big bill that just came in the mail. That was me reading the Bible. And then you look closer at that same piece of mail, and somewhere on there, usually in like way too small print, it says, this is not a bill. Or it'll say, paid in full. I was reading the Bible as a bill. And I was seeing, this is all the stuff that I owe God, or he wants me to do, or needs me to do, or is calling me to do. And this is the bill that needs to be paid. And the Bible is not a bill. The Bible is an inspired set of scriptures that are authoritative, and the main purpose of the Bible isn't to tell you the history of Israel. It's not to tell you the do's and don'ts of life. The main purpose of the Bible is to show you Jesus. And it has that other stuff in there as a backdrop, but the other stuff being a backdrop is the key, because if you don't see Jesus, you'll never go and do the stuff correctly. You need to see Jesus in the scriptures. They needed to see Jesus in their own scriptures before they could actually see Jesus right alongside of them in their journey. They needed it. They needed to see Jesus. This is for you. This is for me. When you read the Bible, don't open it like a bill. Don't read it like a bill. Even when it sounds like a bill, somewhere, if you read it carefully enough, there's a little print that says, this is paid in full already. This is not a bill. This is a summary of your assets. This is a summary of what's already been accomplished for you. So, okay, that's step one. Then he began, beginning with Moses and with all the prophets. So what's interesting there is when he says beginning with Moses, we're talking about the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, the Pentateuch, whatever you want to call it. So, and then he says, and all the prophets. And then later in the same chapter, he has the same conversation with the rest of the disciples and does the same thing. He opens their minds up to the scriptures and shows himself throughout, and he throws in the Psalms in there too. So you could read any part of the Bible, and somewhere in there, there's Jesus. And I'll give you another hint. If as you're reading the Bible, you don't see Jesus, keep reading. Don't get stuck. One of the things we get stuck on and we make mistakes is we're like, I don't know what God was doing here. Why did God do this? I don't know either. But if I don't see Jesus, I'm just going to keep reading until I do. And I'll loop back around. Someday, somewhere, I'm sure God will show me where Jesus is or was, but I'm not going to get lost in the sauce of what's happening. Like, I want to find Jesus. I want to encounter him. And if you don't get stuck on every little thing and keep looking until you see Jesus, you'll be much more productive, much more productive. The goal of Bible reading isn't Bible reading. Oh man, Christians need to hear this. The goal of Bible reading is not Bible reading. The goal of Bible reading is relational interaction with the Lord. This is how you do that. This is how you do that. All right, keep going. And they approached the village where they were going, and he acted as though he were going further. I told you, Jesus was playing them like a fiddle. Sometimes Jesus is playing you like a fiddle, and that's actually, he's doing it for your benefit. He's leading you into the encounter that you need. Even if you're not ready to get there immediately, he'll walk with you until you are, and he'll nudge you and ask the question the right way so you get there. So he acts like he's not going to go, or he acts like he's going to keep going. Next verse. But they urged him, saying, "Stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it. And breaking it, he began giving it to them. What does this remind you of? A bunch of indiscernible muttering. That's what I heard. I'm going to assume some of you said the Last Supper or the Communion or the Lord's Supper or whatever. All of those are fair and right answers. This is definitely emblematic of those things, the Lord's Supper, communion. And if you remember during the Last Supper, this is the last meal that Jesus shared with his disciples. He breaks the bread and he pours the wine, and they all drink of this cup and they all break of this bread and they eat it. And he basically says, look, this is my body, this is my blood. You consume this and do it in remembrance of me. This is gonna help. Somehow this exercise, this physical example is going to help you remember something about Jesus. And Paul will explain more of it later, but this sort of thing is now going to play out. So he began breaking it, the bread that is, he began giving it to them. Next verse. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. You're like, wait a minute. What happened? So they took communion with Jesus. By the way, every time you take communion, Jesus is there. He's actually there all the time anyways, but communion is an intentional time where you're now remembering who he is. And really, let's go to, before I explain this verse, go to 1 Corinthians 10 for a second. Is not the cup of blessing which we bless a sharing in the blood of Christ? Is not the bread which we break a sharing in the body of Christ? I think, is there another verse in there right afterwards? Since there is one bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one bread. So this communion, one of its, in addition to just remembering Jesus, what you're really remembering about Jesus isn't like, oh yeah, remember how Jesus like healed a bunch of people and did a bunch of good things? You're not, that wasn't the goal. These guys already knew that. The guy and the gal on the road to Emmaus already knew that. They remembered Jesus just fine. What didn't they remember? What didn't they understand? This. They didn't get, we're actually part of, Jesus didn't just do something for us. He did something to us, fully including us in it. That's what they didn't understand. We were hoping that he was going to come to redeem Israel. Now it's the third. They didn't realize that when Jesus died on the cross, he did that to them. He included them in it. They didn't realize that when Jesus resurrected, and they didn't even believe in the resurrection yet, he didn't just do that for them. He did it with them, to them, including them in it. Communion is this place where you're remembering your oneness with Christ. You're actually consuming the bread of life, not because you picked the right brand of bread at the grocery store or baked bread from. It's not about the bread. You're consuming his body. You're drinking his blood, and it's not, again, don't John 6 me and then I'll leave because like, oh, Tim just talked about cannibalism. It's a metaphor. It's a metaphor for your connection and intimacy, your oneness with him, and actually your oneness with the body of Christ that we're all part of. And so communion is this place where you remember Jesus, yes, but you actually remember that he included you in himself. And if you take the picture to its full, you're actually taking him and putting him inside of you. You're consuming you, so now he's in you, a part of you. That's the gospel. In that day, they will know that I am in my Father, and they are in me, and I am in them. John 14:20. In that day, they will know that I am in my Father, and that they are in me, and I am in them. John 14:20. Communion is about remembering that, coming to a recognition and revelation of that. Once they did that, they saw Jesus. And you're like, well, but then he disappeared, right? Yeah, for 2 seconds, and then he came back and met with all of them again. And the whole point of it was like, look, you're going to see these episodes of encounters with the resurrected Christ, and then he's going to ascend. And you're going to stop seeing those episodes play out like that so that the Holy Spirit could then be sent, and those episodes now happen all the time, not with a person that you walk down the road with and literally eat bread with, but you're literally able to encounter that resurrected Jesus everywhere. And the context of how it happens is slightly different because you're not literally going to sit down with a physical person that for some reason you can't recognize even though you know them. You're going to be sitting there around a table with other believers. And Jesus is in the conversation. Jesus is in the breaking of bread. Jesus is in the prayer. Jesus is in those moments. Jesus is in your prayer closet. Jesus is in church service. Jesus is in all of these. He's in your cubicle at work or your whatever at work. He's in your commute. He's in your car. He's there with you every moment and every day. And communion is us intentionally recognizing our oneness and intimacy with him. So your job, you're like, oh, you're going to take communion today, right? Wrong. Why not? Well, there's so many different reasons why. I didn't think of it, number one, until like today. And number two, we've never taken communion as a church in a Sunday morning setting. People have taken communion as part of the church, obviously, but we've never done it in this setting. And the reason why is I can't do it. I just can't see. I can't give you broken saltine crackers and grape juice. I can't do it and then tell you it's communion. So your job is to go take communion. Preferably with at least one other person, but honestly, you could still do it effectively, just you and the Lord. Your job is to go take communion. You're like, wait a minute, are you asking me to drink wine? I don't care if you drink wine or not. Do whatever you want to do. Go take communion, whatever that looks like for you. Go take communion sometime this week and be intentional about, yes, you're remembering Jesus, but don't just remember the guy who did miracles and cool stuff. He was a prophet, mighty in word and deed. They already knew that. What they were missing is this is the guy who actually didn't just do something for us. He did something to us, with us, including us in himself. And that Jesus is now inside of me and I'm inside of him. And this moment of me breaking bread and eating it is me remembering my oneness with his body. It's me drinking this wine or whatever you're going to drink. It's me partaking of the blood that caused me to now have oneness with him in God's perfect love that's been made complete in me.
So I love the Emmaus parallel in that, and that invitation to insert ourselves in. And I think it's always challenging to know, like, some Bible stories don't insert yourself because it won't go well for you. I think what you said about the Bible is so true. Like, we love to take little like excerpts and be like, that was for me. And you're like, maybe we should include the rest of the chapter because out of context, it could be really scary. But I feel that invitation today on the road to Emmaus and that metaphor for life and how we're all on a journey. And I feel like there were so many parallels, and especially in that invitation to keep looking for Jesus. And I just heard, I don't know who this is for, but life can be that way too. Just like reading the Bible, where sometimes it's not clear where Jesus is. And it's that road to Emmaus journey that says, like, persevere and keep going and keep the faith, because I think we've all had seasons of our life where you look back and you're like, oh, like, I see how God had his hand on every single thing. But sometimes in the moment, it's not clear. And I can't say whether that's because, like, we're not asking. I can't say whether that's because it's just not clear or it's not the right timing. But I'm saying we've all had those seasons. We've all had those seasons where we're like, where is God? But keep going and keep looking for Jesus, because there's that moment. There's that moment where it becomes clear that he's been there the whole time. And I think there's also a call there to go higher and to be excited to see him along the way. Like, I can't imagine the feeling of those disciples where, like, you know, Jesus is pointing himself out in the scriptures and you're like, yeah, that's great. Yeah, okay, we'll eat together. And you're like, oh, that's Jesus. And then the moment has passed already. And, like, I feel like such an invitation too to say, God, like, I want to see your hand in all of these moments too. I want to see as it's unfolding, I want to be a part of this. And isn't that really what the role of the Holy Spirit is? When Jesus left and said, yep, like, and now I'm in you just as I'm in the Father. Like, that was the whole goal. And I think sometimes we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg of what that's afforded us. And I'm so excited to see, like, as we uncover what's under the surface of what that really means and what that really looks like in our lives.